Today I'd like to talk to you about what I believe every couple goes through that is married, but every couple certainly goes through this almost on steroids if there's been infidelity. I can tell you time and time again funny stories and painful stories about how Samantha and I went through a season where we just could not hear each other objectively. And it finally became abundantly clear that if we were going to move forward in our relationship, during that season, we needed a translator. We needed someone to translate to me what Samantha was really saying. And we certainly needed a translator to translate to Samantha what I was saying. When we finally arrived at that point, the entire trajectory, the entire climate surrounding our communication radically changed. I don't know if you can relate to this, but there were seasons where Samantha and I would start a conversation and it would start out kind of okay, but somewhere between 5 and 9 minutes or 10 minutes later, we were in just complete baboonery. I mean, it just took one little word or something or inference, and before you know it, we were two pit bulls fighting in an alley, and it just would make your head spin. I remember time and time again when we would end with just taking a time out and not talking. I would sit down and kind of try and digest what had happened, and it would make your head spin how fast we would just hit this point of flooding. It was overwhelming, and it was so frustrating. It was so frustrating. I would get angry at God sometimes. I was certainly angry at Samantha. Sometimes I would get angry at myself, but I would just get so angered at the sense of frustration and hopelessness that would seep in because we were just trying to have a simple conversation, and before you know it, it was, curse word, lashing out, go to your own corners and hate each other for a couple of hours, a couple of days. And it just was so painful. And it became clear that so many of you have those struggles as well. It's apparent, and I just want to appeal to you today to buy in. And I hope you'll buy in at the end, but I hope you'll start to open up to the idea that you need a translator in your relationship. That's what professional coaching, that's what professional therapy, that's what online courses like what we provide in our EMS weekend intensives. Man, you just come to a point where you need that translator. You need to understand what your spouse is really saying to you. Because if you can't, you're not going to be able to heal. Whenever I talk with people who are in crisis, I'll ask them, how long have y'all been together? Because that kind of helps me understand the amount of objectivity that is not present in their communication. Because here's the thing. If you've been together longer than maybe 5 years, there's the understanding that objectivity is out the door. See, there's so much hurt that gets in the way. There's so much pain. There's so much trauma. There's so much lack of trust. There's resentment. There's bitterness. And so when your spouse is communicating to you, you're not really hearing objectively the content that they are trying to share with you. You're hearing all that they are saying through the filter of, if you're an unfaithful, for example, well, you're just a cheater. You're always going to be a cheater. And because you cheated, you're a doormat. And you don't get to talk, and you don't get to have feelings, and you don't get to have emotions. And you're the one that made this horrible mistake, so you're going to live under this horrible mistake the rest of your life. Now, what was being said by the betrayed spouse to you was none of that, but you're probably perceiving what they're saying through that filter, and it goes both ways. So the unfaithful may be talking to you, betrayed, but you can't really hear objectively what they're saying because what you're perceiving is, well, if you'd have had more sex, if you'd have paid more attention to my needs, if you'd have been a better spouse, I wouldn't have cheated. And you know what? You're the reason that I cheated anyway, and you're never going to get over this. And so we're going to keep having to have this conversation, and you don't really care about me anyway. You're just mad, and you're going to stay mad forever, and all you can do is be mad, and you have PTSD, and you don't care about anybody else, and all that stuff. That is not what the unfaithful is saying to you. But that is the overshadowing effect that happens because there isn't objectivity. And so you guys are just doing this. You're two pit bulls in the alley. The good news is, the great news is, there is help to get through that season of pain. Here's where the game changed for me. We were sitting together, Samantha and I, with Rick, having this conversation. And I'll tell you early on, I was resistant to therapy, but I was willing to do it because I wanted to do whatever it took to save our relationship. It wasn't my idea of a good time, and I had kind of believed a lot of misnomers and just untruths about professional counselors and all of that. And so when we went to see Rick, I was kind of like, well, this will be a gong show, but let's go do it. And I understand so many unfaithfuls, but even betrayeds, are afraid to go get help. Oftentimes, unfaithfuls are afraid to go because they think they're just going to be tarred and feathered and just told what a terrible human being they are, and this is all their fault, and there's no substance to their conversation and no truth to what they feel. I get that. And I felt some of that too, and I was just full of shame, and I was embarrassed, and so I didn't want to go get help. But as we started to meet with Rick, we kind of came to a point after, I don't know how many sessions, but this was the day that the game changed. So we're sitting and talking, and Samantha said something to me that I was kind of like, well, that's just whatever. And Rick went, hold on. So Samantha, what you just kind of said to Sam was this. Is that what you meant? And she was like, no. And he looked over at me and said, Samuel, is that what you felt? And I said, I get to share how I felt. He said, what did that statement make you feel like? And I said, and he said, this is your time to speak. And I said, and I just kind of said, I felt really kind of shamed and demeaned and humiliated, and I don't want to talk anymore because Samantha's going to get mad. And he said, Samantha, is that what you meant? And she said, no, I didn't mean to say that. And he said, but that's what your words really imply. And so I was kind of stunned, and I was like, so we get to do that? Like, you're going to say those things to Samantha? And listen, before you hit send on that comment that you're going to maybe come at me, we needed a translator, because there were times where Samantha would say some things out of hurt, out of trauma, out of pain, and they were really trite or unfair, demeaning, and Rick would go, hold on. What I think you mean to say is this, Samantha. And she would say, well, yeah, that's what I mean. And he said, well, what you said was this. And she would go, oh. And I will tell you, genuinely, at least 80% of the time, okay, early on, it's about 60 or 70% of the time. But as we really got some momentum, it was more like 80, 90% of the time, Samantha didn't mean to shame me, didn't mean to demean me, just was communicating out of her hurt and pain. But she needed help on how to translate that so that I would receive it and not reciprocate with anger and rage and lash out at her. And that absolutely transformed our communication. We needed that. You see, so often, you just can't make your spouse get it. They're not hearing you objectively. You need a translator. That's where something like our EMS Online or one of our courses comes in for individuals, or the EMS Weekend. You won't make it through this difficult season without a translator. But if you shame that translator, oh, well, he's just a bitter man, she's just a bitter woman, blah, blah, blah. If you keep shaming them, you will miss the message. I didn't always like the way Rick talked to me. I didn't always like the things that he had to say to me, but he was translating to me the trauma that was inside of Samantha, and it completely opened my eyes. And I'll tell you, he had to translate to Samantha the pain, the childhood trauma, the shame, the embarrassment that she didn't even understand. As he translated that to her, she began to find compassion for me. She began to actually well up with emotion in Rick's office when she began to go, well, wait a minute. I didn't know that that's what he was feeling. I thought he was feeling this. Or she would say, I hate that he feels that way. I don't want him to feel that way. And it was monumental, the intervention that Rick, as our translator, provided. Look, I know all the excuses, okay? I consider myself to be a pretty good communicator. I've been in sales for decades. I have been on debate teams. I traveled all over the world speaking to massive groups of people. I find myself to be a pretty good communicator, but with Samantha, too much gets in the way. Samantha's very elegant and has a wonderful voice and is very easy on the eyes, but it's tough to hear her. There's a lot of water under the bridge of our communication. Hurt and pain, misunderstanding, moodiness, resentment, bitterness gets in the way. You absolutely need a translator. You need an expert translator, not just any translator. I've said that and I will continue to say that my whole life. The source that you trust with your translation needs to be an expert source. What's getting in your way today? I don't usually do this, but maybe drop a comment on affairrecovery.com or on Twitter or on YouTube. Maybe share what's getting in your way. Sometimes you need to hear it out of your own mouth. Now, before you go, if my spouse would not do, I get it, but we're talking about each other today. I know for me, what would get in my way more than anything was shame, embarrassment, a feeling of disqualification, a hopelessness, and a resentment towards Samantha. And let me just tell you, the translator that we had, and we had a couple of others besides Rick, absolutely saved our marriage and saved our lives. I hope and pray you can find one to help you. But don't keep trying to be a pit bull with another pit bull. You're not going to make them get it. They're not hearing you objectively. It's not working. Don't keep doing what's not working.